What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, April 4th, 2018, middle of the day, weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday. And we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today, and I really do mean a lot. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Sam is in our control room today, ready to answer the phone. But I'm going to ask you not to call in unless you've got something really important to share with us, because we have so much in our talking points list to get through today. Don't just call in to hear your voice on the radio, but if you've got something important to say, go ahead and call on in. So getting right on into it, we're starting to find out more and more about that horrible shooting at YouTube yesterday, and as it turns out, it was not, in fact, a love triangle. The shooter doesn't even work for YouTube. She's from San Diego, California. And apparently she literally drove up the length of California to San Bruno to attack YouTube. And the issue was about censorship and demonetization. Apparently this shooter, Nassim Aghdam, is a Muslim vegan animal activist. She's 39 years old. She lived in San Diego, and she was very active on YouTube, and she had a lot of followers. And apparently she was doing videos about veganism. She was doing exercise videos, where she'd exercise in front of a green screen and there'd be a background. She's very attractive, and apparently she was upwardly mobile in terms of her career. And she had no direct connection with YouTube other than her YouTube channel. And she was very angry that her channel had been demonetized by YouTube. And so we have this Muslim, vegan, animal activist, you're just another typical Southern good old boy NRA member that we're dealing with here. And apparently she was very angry. She had a vendetta against YouTube, and apparently this is another classic case of the police just not following up, because her father called the police concerned about her anger at YouTube, and then of course she disappeared and the family didn't know where she was, and it turned out she was driving up California. And interestingly enough, just hours before the shooting occurred, the police had found her sleeping in her car, and they had just let her go. Now, the family, again, they warned the police that she might do something about YouTube. She was apparently very, very angry. The father warned them, the brother warned them, and the police did nothing. Now, all of Nassim Aghdam's videos have been taken down. She's been purged from social media. But interestingly enough, one of the videos showed her doing squats. One of the exercise videos, she was doing squats in front of the flag of Israel to the music of Hava Nagila. And people are scratching their heads and wondering about that. Now, she apparently in her posts said she was Persian, but whether that related to her religion or not is unclear. Interestingly enough, the corporate media is trying to downplay this lady's Muslim background because it's only fueling the anti-immigrant, anti-refugee furor, if you will. And so Mashable, when they posted a picture of this Nassim Aghdam, they lightened her skin and they gave her green eyes. I mean, talk about fake news. So again, the question that nobody is asking, it needs to be answered, was she on prescription antidepressants? And looking at her eyes in some of the videos, I have to wonder. The eyes were a little wider than you would normally expect. But again, very attractive lady on her way up. Apparently she'd actually done some commercial work. So being demonetized shouldn't have pushed her over the edge. I've been demonetized. I'm not on my way to YouTube. Anyway, let's take a phone call. Mur in Wisconsin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, I was up late again last night, got entrenched in looking at this, and turns out her spiritual direction is Baha'i. Now, after Sandy Hook, they also had a big thing about Baha'i. This is out of Haifa, Israel, and it is the planned one world religion.
Okay, well, that would certainly explain the exercise video in front of the flag of Israel.
Wouldn't it, though?
Yes.
Okay. I can send you some links in your email if you'd like.
Yes, I would like to see that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, if the shooter is Baha'i, then the Muslims are off the hook for this one. Now then. Claire's laughing in the other room. All right, so let's get into the domestic politics. There's a lot going on, and the more you dig, the dirtier it gets. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates rejoining our network. So the latest texts that are coming out of the FBI between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page seem to indicate that the FBI and the Department of Justice were rushing to get that anti-Trump FISA warrant. They were just pushing to get it as quickly as they possibly could to basically go on after Carter Page. And again, this doesn't sound like due process. It sounds like a rush job to just get to the end. Now, yesterday, Mueller's office informed Trump's lawyers that Trump is no longer a focus of the criminal probe in the Russia-Trump collusion case. And immediately red warning flags went up that this is inappropriate. We don't know what's going on. Trey Gowdy is out there saying Trump should not relax. He should not breathe a sigh of relief. Gowdy said a prosecutor will not normally disclose this information. After all, in theory, Mueller has not yet heard from all the available witnesses. And Gowdy says it's a weird hybrid of criminality and politics. Now, what may be going on is Mueller's trying to play a mind game. He's trying to get Trump and his lawyers to relax in order to blindside him further down the road. So this is definitely dirty politics at work here. Lawyer Robert Barnes has explained that he believes Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein usurped the power of his boss, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, in order to grant Special Counsel Robert Mueller secret authorization to go after Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort. Now, this whole special counsel deal has been inappropriately handled from the start. The way the special counsel statute reads, there has to be a regular Department of Justice investigation. If that investigation uncovers actual evidence of wrongdoing, then a special counsel is appointed by the Attorney General. But Rosenstein simply tapped Robert Mueller and said, "Sick 'em, boy." Now, Attorney Greg Jarrett is out there saying that Rosenstein and Mueller colluded to break the law. And he's calling on Mueller to resign after this latest Rosenstein memo has surfaced. And apparently in this memo, Robert Mueller admits Rosenstein's order appointing him to the special counsel was intentionally vague in order to give him the widest possible latitude for his fishing expedition. Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz reacted to reports that Mueller is investigating Donald Trump for possible collusion by saying, you know, this is a made-up crime. There is no such crime as collusion in the federal statute. They're just trying to find something that they can smear Donald Trump with. And Mueller right now appears to be looking not for something to prosecute Trump for, but something with which he can be impeached with if the Democrats take Congress this November, which, unless we stop those illegal immigrants from voting somehow, is probably going to happen. Story coming out of Free Beacon. Momentum is continuing to build on Capitol Hill for the Trump administration to reopen an investigation into former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton and her connections to that anti-Trump dossier written by Christopher Steele, which was the basis for the ongoing investigation by Robert Mueller, as well as for that FISA warrant. Now, that dossier has been discredited. There was no way to verify it, And if Mueller doesn't actually have hard evidence of any wrongdoing, then his investigation is totally illegitimate. And we know now that Christopher Steele was paid via cutouts by the Democratic National Committee and the Hillary Clinton campaign. They just wanted to come up with this document to try and smear Donald Trump. And they really went over the top. I think one of the reasons why this dossier didn't work was the part about the prostitutes. I think that was just a bridge too far for most people. Maybe they were hoping the sensationalist aspect of it would guarantee coverage in the corporate media, but the corporate media is heavily liberal. They would have covered the dossier anyway. I think somebody made a major strategic mistake going with that story about Trump and the two prostitutes. Now, of course, Sessions is insisting he doesn't need to appoint a second special counsel for any of this. He insists he's got a prosecutor out of Utah looking at it who's got all the authority he needs. But again, I think we've got, what is this, our third Attorney General in a row that is dedicated to protecting the higher-ups from the consequences of their illegal actions. Now, today is the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And there are commemorations and memorials all over the country, as well there should be. He truly was a great man. And I think his I Have a Dream speech was very inspirational. And this was a man who fought for his principles. He was willing to go to jail for his principles. He led the marches following the Rosa Parks bus strike issue. And he got 1 million people to come to the mall in Washington, D.C., which is where he did the I Have a Dream speech. And he was seen as a major threat to the status quo, not just in the South. He was a rallying cry for the black community's resistance to the war in Vietnam because of the very obvious practice of the U.S. Army of putting the black kids up on the front lines and keeping the white kids, for the most part, in the safer rear echelon areas. It was discrimination of a sort, and Dr. Martin Luther King was starting to organize a resistance against the Vietnam War on those grounds. So there were a lot of people who really hated him. So this gets back to a story that we had years ago on whatreallyhappened.com, and we reposted it today, and you might want to take a look at it. And it has to do with the fact that James Earl Ray was framed for the assassination of Martin Luther King. And I'm not the only one who thinks so. Even Dr. King's family think he was framed. They are convinced that Dr. King was assassinated by the FBI on orders from the Nixon White House. Now, what we found here, this gentleman named Ted Wilburn, who lived right there where the assassination took place, he went on in and he took a bunch of photographs, and this is what we found. You're probably very familiar with this iconic image of Dr. King lying on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, and everybody around him are all pointing in the same direction upward. And when that photo was published in the corporate media, it said, everybody's pointing at the rooming house window where James Earl Ray had fired the fatal shot. Well, Ted took a much wider angle shot of that exact same scene from the exact same location. And by looking at this article, what you can see is everybody is pointing to the roof of the building next door to the rooming house. Now remember, James Earl Ray claimed to be innocent of the shooting. He was convinced by his government-appointed lawyer to plead guilty, for which he would be given a reduced sentence. So James Earl Ray pled guilty. The judge sentenced him to life without parole. James Earl Ray said, I want to recant my plea, and the judge said, it's too late, we got you, you're going away. And that was basically it. And James Earl Ray died in prison of an illness that could have been cured had he been allowed to leave the prison. Now, a little postscript to this involves the rifle that was planted on James Earl Ray, because as it turns out, it had a manufacturing defect. Every single bullet fired through that rifle has a deep gouge along one side. And the bullets that were removed from Dr. Martin Luther King do not have that gouge. And on the basis of that evidence, James Earl Ray was trying to petition for a new trial. And the FBI said, well, no, the rifle was improperly cleaned. We'll have to have another ballistic test somewhere down the road. And they knew he was ill, and they just stalled and stalled and stalled until James Earl Ray died. And the judge threw the case out of court, saying nobody else had standing to reopen this case. Now, looking back with the hindsight of wisdom, after Saddam's nukes and Assad's sarin gas and all the rest of it, it's easy to see the pattern of deception and cover-up that has come to characterize the assassinations carried out by the U.S. government, whether it's Dr. King or John F. Kennedy or Robert F. Kennedy or whoever. It's a very bloody business being at the high levels of the United States government. But we need to remember that Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated by the deep state. And even Dr. King's family agrees James Earl Ray was framed. He was the patsy, just like Lee Harvey Oswald was the patsy. Now, getting into the war zones, another convoy of militants and their families have departed from the district of Duma in eastern Ghouta under the agreement with the government. According to SANA, the convoy consisted of 24 buses, including 1,198 militants and their families, and was set to move to the northern part of Aleppo province, which is controlled by the Turkish forces. And on April 4th, which is today, another batch of militants reportedly started preparing to leave Duma. So this is all but over. The militants are leaving. ISIS is gone. Meanwhile, as the militants pull on out, the Syrian army continues to go through what they've left behind, and once again, they have found documents confirming U.S. covert cooperation with the Eastern Ghouta terrorists. It just keeps happening time and time and time again. Now, remember where Trump the other day said that we were pulling out of Syria, let somebody else take care of it. And then Saudi Arabia said the U.S. should stay on in. Well, apparently Donald Trump has done a 180. He agreed in a meeting with his national security team to keep U.S. troops in Syria until ISIS is defeated. Well, ISIS has been defeated. And what this tells us is that in point of fact, Donald Trump is not in control. He may be the president, but he's not in control. He's not acting presidential. He's not the boss. He's just a facade for the real power behind the throne, the neocons, the war hawks. Now, getting on down to Great Britain, this little kerfuffle with Russia over the Skripal poisoning is turning into a disaster for Great Britain. And one of the articles about this is from Russia Today. Britain's establishment is desperate for Russian guilt and will ignore anything to get it. And it's not just Russia who's saying that. Livingston is saying that Britain's Skripal claims is just lies and smears. And of course, Britain is now being forced to backtrack because Porton Down could not find any evidence that the Novichok that was used to attack Skripal came from Russia. Remember, yesterday they came out with that new spin saying, well, even if somebody else did it, and even if the Novichok came from someplace other than Russia, it had to be done with Putin's permission, which nobody was buying that. They're trying to Iraq Russia. Oh, Russia's got chemical weapons. They're coming to use them on us. We must attack them first. Now, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons is saying that it will provide Moscow with data on the Skripal case only if Great Britain shows what they're terming politely to be goodwill. Of course, nobody's expecting London to do that at all. London is trying to basically keep all the actual hard data under wraps and basically just rely on, trust us, we're the government. We would never lie about something this important. Now, the British Foreign Office has now backed off and said they never claimed the nerve agent came from Russia. They tweeted that, and they've now deleted that. So they got caught in a lie. Yes, the British government is lying. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get back to the news and phone calls, if you can help out Republic Broadcasting, we really do need your help. We're in a war with the corporate media. We're in a war with the war hawks. We're in a war with the U.S. Government itself. They need to lie you into a war. We're trying to truth you into peace. So if you can help on out, the address where you can send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity, cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. And the phone number, if you want to call on in and become a recurring subscriber, is 800-724-2719, extension 03. And don't forget the front site promo that's going on right now. I understand that's doing really, really well. A lot of people have taken advantage of that. And for $500, you can get a lifetime commander membership at the Front Sight Firearms Training Academy. This is a really good deal. If I lived in the western part of the U.S., I would go for this deal myself. This offer ends May 5th, so you need to act now. All right, let's grab a phone call now from Terry in California. Aloha, Terry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I really can't let this go by. I'm going to have to ask a question, then hang up, and you answer later. I'm a Vietnam veteran, Marine Corps, worked all over I-Corps, and I wonder where in the world you got the information that we put the blocks out in front when the white kids were in the back. That's it. Goodbye.
Okay, well, this was a major complaint that was coming out of the civil rights movement of the time. That in point of fact, I mean, there were white officers out on the front lines, but that there was a bias whereas white children, especially from more prominent families, were kept behind. I remember seeing this picture of a very young Al Gore during his quote-unquote service, where he was basically toured around the rear echelon areas. And the picture is rather funny because he's actually got the barrel of his M16 pointed at his own head. Anyway, let's take another phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, at least we wouldn't have had to hear from global warming anymore.
Yeah, true.
Okay.
I'm going to presume the gun wasn't loaded because Al Gore being Al Gore.
Hey, guns don't kill people. People kill people. He kills himself, right? Hey, Mike, you know, the OPCW, I mean, do you realize if Putin wasn't there and you had like John McCain, neocon, because Russia has them in their government, you know, in the military-industrial complex over there, we'd be already in a world war. You know, like I said, how much more of this crap can people take? It's the lie. It's all a lie. We all know that now, but they're not going to admit it because it doesn't fit the agenda. You know, so the OPCW is a joke. I mean, it's just a political hack group. You know, just like remember the plane that got shot down over Ukraine? We all know the Ukrainians shot it down.
Well, believe it or not, that's being fanned up again, and we're going to talk about that in the next segment after the commercial break. But yes, it's all propaganda. All wars are started with lies, and that is an historical reality. Whether it's Adolf Hitler and the Gleiwitz affair, or the claim that the Lusitania was not smuggling weapons to Great Britain, or the claim that Pearl Harbor was a completely unprovoked surprise attack. Looking back on history, we've come to understand how these things are maneuvered and manipulated, and the public is lied to. Torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. How many more times do you have to be lied into a war before you say, I will not be lied into any more wars? My children are too precious to me to let them be killed and crippled on the basis of lies, frauds, and hoaxes.
Well, you got the Power Siberia pipeline going into China that's being worked on. Going to be completed sooner rather than later. It's ahead of schedule. You have Nord Stream 2, right? You have Turk Stream. So, I mean, the British, if they really want to go to that point, you know, when it comes down to it, the next cold spell where they have like 0-degree weather, the Russians are, they should, you know, Putin should come out, whoever's, and if because this is going to drag on, Mike, you know that, until there's a war. It's going to come to the point where the Russians need to come out with a press conference and say, you know, we had it.
You mean we've had it? Okay, yeah. Russia's not going to do that. You know, Putin is trying to avoid doing anything that will escalate the situation. The escalations are all coming from the West, from Great Britain with the Skripal nonsense. We've got a lot of American politicians saying, well, McMaster's said, we have not punished Russia enough. We have not made this costly enough for Russia. So all of the provocations and escalations are coming from the Western side. Putin is playing this very, very cool. He's playing it like a chess master, and he doesn't want a war. China doesn't want a war. The United States wants a war. They feel they need a war. And all of the NATO and U.S. allies, they feel they need a war to get out of the mess that they've made of their own countries. And it's a game they've played twice before, with big mistake number 1 and big mistake number 2. Anyway, Dustin, we got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We're going to come back and take one more phone call. Then we're probably going to close the lines for a while because I need to get some news out here. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take one more phone call. Then we're going to close the lines because I've got a lot of news to get through today. So, Peter in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I'll make it real quick, but the guy who called in from the Marine Corps in Vietnam, you're right. Blacks disproportionately served in the military in Vietnam. They disproportionately served in the front lines. The reason for that, and the reason for this guy's incredulity, which you could hear in his voice, is was going on where white kids for a long time, so the last year, could get a college deferment or with a little political connection, get into the National Guard like George Bush, or they could get out completely like Bill Clinton, for instance. So they had deferments open to them that black kids didn't have as much of. Secondly, the Marine Corps, which didn't rely on the draft, they relied but relied mostly on volunteers. They didn't have that sort of thing. They were volunteers. They had less blacks in the Marine Corps proportionally. So the disproportion happened mainly in the Army. The third thing was the AFQT Armed Forces Qualification Test, which is basically an IQ test and classifies you. There was, we lost 10,000 helicopters. That's a lot of helicopters to be fixed. The people who scored the highest got in the technical branches of the Army. The people who scored the lowest went into the infantry. That was disproportionately black kids. That's it.
Yeah, that is. And then, of course, later on, there was this claim that the IQ tests were themselves racist. Thank you for the phone call, Peter. We're going to let you go. I got an email from somebody who's a Native American saying that their cousins and brothers, when they served in Vietnam, were also put on the front lines under the excuse that they were better trackers than the other servicemen. So, again, there was a racial bias in those deployments here. Now, getting on back to this whole Skripal situation, the British Foreign Office is now denying that they ever claimed the Novichok came from Russia, but they had actually tweeted that out on their Twitter feed, and then there was that Boris Johnson interview that said exactly the same thing. Now, the Foreign Office has deleted the tweet. They were caught doing it, and that's made matters worse. And so now everybody is understanding this was just a huge lie. And so the Labor Party is out there rebuking Boris Johnson, saying he's got egg on his face and that he misled the public on the Novichok source. And yes, he did. Now, a top German Christian Democratic Union politician is blasting Britain for the absence of evidence in the Skripal case because Germany, going along with Great Britain, expelled 4 Russian diplomats. And that damaged relations between Germany and Russia, and that damage didn't need to occur. And so Germany's politicians are getting very, very angry and upset that they got suckered in on this deal to their own detriment. Now, Vladimir Putin, remember what I just got done saying. He wants to keep things cool. He wants to de-escalate the situation, and he's out there saying he's not interested in apologies. He just wants some common sense. He wants common sense to prevail and just say, we have this crime, we have an attempted assassination, we have this agent, this nerve agent, we don't have anything else. So now that the Skripal is all the fault of Russia narrative is crumbling, quick, let's have a distraction. And so now there's a story that appeared just today coming out of Sputnik News, where the Dutch prosecutors looking into the downing of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 have now come out with the conclusion that the reason there is no radar track indicating a Buk missile rising up from Russia to strike Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 is that it was flying so fast it was invisible to radar. That's it. They're trying to flog this dead horse one more time. So their rationale is the fact that they did not see the missile come from Russia on radar is now their proof the missile came from Russia. Now don't forget, Russia's got radar data indicating a missile came up from the Ukrainian-held areas. And I still think there may have been an attempt to shoot down Vladimir Putin's presidential jet that went wrong, because that jet was in the same area as Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. Putin's jet is a converted Russian commercial airliner, not as grandiose as Air Force One, and it's painted in a livery that is strikingly similar to that of the Malaysian Airlines. And there's that story about this, the Ukrainian pilot who basically landed on his airbase with empty pylons on the wings, just freaking out saying, I got the wrong plane, I got the wrong plane. Facebook has stepped back in to try and distract from the embarrassing Skripal disaster by saying, oh, we found more Russian accounts than previously acknowledged. We found more than 200 Facebook and Instagram pages controlled by a Russian organization that meddled in the U.S. presidential election. And then it goes on to say these pages and accounts were all in Russian. Okay, Facebook, how does a Facebook page or an Instagram post influence the U.S. presidential elections by doing it in a language very few Americans actually speak? Let's just talk about that one. Now, as I mentioned before, the outgoing National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, is saying the United States has failed to impose sufficient costs on Russia, and that this is emboldening the Kremlin. And we're hearing all these people in Washington, D.C. saying that Russia is now interfering and meddling with the world, that Russia is limiting the ability of the United States to exert its influence over the world. In other words, Russia's cutting in on our action. They're cutting in on our toif. You know, get the button, men. We're going to the mattresses here. Now, do you remember when Crimea voted to secede from Ukraine, and then they voted to merge with the Russian republics? It caused a great deal of difficulty because Crimea's primary connection with the land still goes through Ukraine, and Ukraine started shutting those down. So Russia said, no problem, we're going to build you a bridge, and the bridge is open for car traffic 6 months ahead of schedule. We ought to get those Russians to build this light rail system here at the bottom of the hill, which is like 3 years behind schedule at this point. Now, right now, the bridge is open for car traffic, and then toward the end of the year, I guess they're building more lanes to it. Trucks will be allowed to cross the bridge toward the end of the year. Now, this is a 19-kilometer long span across the Kerch Strait. It is the longest bridge in Europe. And it will also have a railway section, which will open in early 2019. Boy, they know how to build them there, don't they? Meanwhile, Russia has set up their latest radar called the Nebo-M, and it has completely, well, they're saying close the area over the Black Sea, by which they mean these radars see everything. In fact, this radar is so powerful, it can see objects up in space, outside the atmosphere. And so now that is in place to close off a possible attack over the Black Sea. We're coming up here on Trump's deadline for the Iran deal. This is May 12th. Basically, Donald Trump is saying that if Iran does not agree to modify the deal and include their long-range ballistic missiles in the deal, that the U.S. will unilaterally pull out from the accord. Now, everybody else thinks the P5+1 is a great deal. Iran surrendered its sort of medium-enriched uranium. They're not doing any enrichment. They never were trying to build a bomb. Nobody ever found any evidence about that. But this is just another way of demonizing and bashing Iran by saying, oh, Iran is the threat in the Middle East. Really? Iran has not initiated a war of conquest in over 200 years, and certainly not since the Iranian Revolution of 1979. This is all about Israel wanting domination over the Middle East. This is all about the United States wanting payback for the Iranian people kicking out their U.S. puppet ruler, the Shah of Iran. It's the private central bankers wanting to erase one of the few remaining countries on earth that don't subscribe to private central banking. Now, Iran is not going to surrender those long-range missiles. They don't have nuclear weapons, but they need to have some kind of weapons to deter an invasion or an attack. Frankly, they're already overmatched. Both the United States and Israel have nuclear weapons. But I don't think they're going to back down anymore, because they've already seen what happens in other countries that agree to disarm. The U.S. will come on in, and the U.S. will say, if you will give up this or that thing, we promise we'll leave you alone. They did it in Iraq with the chemical weapons. Saddam surrendered them under UN supervision, and the U.S. invaded anyway, screaming about non-existent nuclear weapons. Syria surrendered all of their chemical weapons. The U.S. attacked. Iran would be an idiot to give up any more of their weapons. So would North Korea. The pattern is just too obvious. Now, just for a moment, imagine that down in Alabama, there's a white town. And they decided they were going to freeze the tender for plots of land in a new neighborhood because it risked allowing blacks to move in. What would be the response in the corporate media? Oh, it's racism, it's horrible, it's terrible. And what would you think of the town's mayor for claiming the decision was taken in the interest of preserving the white character of his community? Oh, he's a bigot. Really? It'd be all over the newspapers. But if you replace the word white with Jewish, this describes what just happened in Kfar Vradim, a small town of 6,000 residents in Galilee in Israel's north. And Vradim's policy cannot be judged in isolation. It apparently is quite common all over Israel, where there is discrimination against Palestinians buying land and buying homes. But it's okay for Israel. Have you noticed that we have all these liberals who are all in favor of liberation, intervention here and there because of universal human rights? Oh, we have to intervene in Syria because Assad is killing his people. And, oh, we have to intervene in Libya because Gaddafi was killing his people. And Saddam was killing his people, and so forth and so on. But when Israel kills Palestinians, everybody shrugs. And that proves that the humanitarianism is a total fraud. It's just another excuse for wars of conquest. Now, this Passover massacre has turned into a tremendous public relations disaster. Israel is talking tough. They're refusing to back down. They're saying there will be no investigations. It's all the Palestinians' fault, and not that many people got hurt anyway. And the Gazans are going to continue to march, aiming for May 15th, which is Nakba Day, which is the day after the United States is expected to open its new embassy in Jerusalem. So the Gazans are not backing down. They've got nothing left to lose. Now, there's a video that was put up by this gentleman named Mohammed Karim. He is a soccer player, very well known in Palestine. And he's just there near where the protesters are marching. They're marching peacefully. There's no rioting. There's no violence going on. And he's got his cell phone on a selfie stick, and he's just shooting himself, talking about what's going on. And right in the middle of it, he's shot in the knee by an Israeli sniper, which has not only ended his soccer career, he's going to need knee replacement surgery just to be able to walk again. And this video confirms reports that the IDF are intentionally aiming for joints to permanently cripple the Palestinians. And you're not going to see this in the American corporate media. Now, here's a positive note, a little bit of a breakthrough that music can soothe the savage beast. During this cultural exchange that's been going on between the two Koreas, this K-pop group, which is very popular in South Korea, but banned in North Korea, was allowed to go up to Pyongyang and have a concert to which Kim Jong-un attended. And he came out of it saying that he liked the music, that he was deeply moved by it, and that there may be a lifting of these cultural bans. Now, this is a far cry from just a few years ago where South Korea was literally blasting K-pop music into North Korea using giant speakers at the edge of the DMZ. The two Koreas are trying to move together. The U.S. doesn't want that to happen, but it looks like Kim Jong-un is starting to get on board along with Moon Jae-in. And that's a really, really good sign. So let's talk about the economic news, because the trade war is really starting to ramp up. The U.S. has released a China tariff list targeting 1,300 products. And they're subject to a 25% tariff because of Trump's crackdown on the trade imbalance. And the issue here is that a lot of these products that are made in China cannot be made here. That's the real issue. Our short-sighted, greedy CEOs, aided and abetted by a complicit government, have allowed American manufacturing to decay over the last 3 going on 4 decades. And the reason that China is such a manufacturing powerhouse, they know how to make things. And the United States has forgotten. We can't actually make an iPhone here in the United States. And so what's going to happen is that the American consumer is going to be forced to pay 25% more for the same Chinese products, which the government will collect as yet another tax on the American people. And until somebody starts actually pulling back from all this military spending and investing in new factories, nothing's going to change. This was a bad, bad idea. Now, do you know how Donald Trump is at war on Amazon? Well, an interesting little story has just surfaced out of ORAS. Apparently, Trump dined with Oracle co-CEO Safra Catz Tuesday night. And Oracle is a company that is currently in direct competition to land a major Pentagon contract worth billions. Now, something is going on, because if nothing was going on, Trump would have to know better than to be meeting with this co-CEO when this contract is still under negotiation and he is publicly attacking Oracle's competition for this contract. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about the economy, and it was quite a wild ride on the stock market today, where it started out really, really low and slowly but surely got shoved up. The Dow ended up 230. And it's almost counterintuitive when you think about all this talk about escalating tariffs and trade sanctions. Now, none of the tariffs are actually in effect yet, but it has to be or should be worrying people. And we have to keep an eye on that, because we know the government rigs so many of the figures. They fudge the rate of inflation. They're certainly fudging the unemployment numbers by a huge margin. And somebody was noticing that as the investors move away from the old guard tech companies like Facebook and Google and Twitter, which are seeing their stocks go down, they're sort of casting around for the next wonder stock, like blockchain companies and so forth. And it may be a bit of a panic, or they may be victims of their own greed, because in a highly volatile market, in uncertain times, what wise and prudent investors would be looking for was something that's safe and stable and growing slowly but predictably. And instead, it's almost like investors are looking for the next wonder stock, the one that they're going to buy in and ride to a vast fortune in a few weeks and then be able to retire. And that's almost like the kind of thinking that you see in the casinos in Las Vegas and Atlantic City, where people walk on in just dreaming of putting one quarter in that giant slot machine and hitting the big jackpot at once. Or people who buy a lottery ticket, dreaming that they're going to win the entire 50 million or whatever. It's not realistic. And it shows that investor thinking on Wall Street is less about cool analysis and more about magical and wishful thinking here. Now, pardon me, David Marsh, who's the managing director at think tank, the Official Monetary and Financial Institutes Forum, is out there saying the tech stock sell-off is just now getting started. And he's had this interesting little comment saying, you put them on a pedestal one day and they're great, and you knock them off the next day. And it's obviously bad for investors, and it's bad for the underlying company. Volatility can actually harm the company whose stock is being traded, along with the various pump and dump scams that are out there. There have actually been companies that have done a great business. They have an IPO, and then they get targeted for a pump and dump by the scammers. The stock gets run way on up. The scammers make their profit. The stock crashes, and the company, through no fault of its own, it's driven out of business, and all of its employees let go. This is why there has to be regulation of the financial markets. But all we hear from Wall Street is deregulate, 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 and all we hear from Washington, D.C. is, sure, we trust you, you'll be fine. Now, a lot of people are starting to pick up on this story. There's $21 trillion missing from the United States government. That's $65,000 for every person in America. That is a lot of money. Where did it go? And is it really just $25 trillion that's gone missing? There's no real full-on audit of either the U.S. government, the Pentagon, or the Federal Reserve. We're just supposed to take their word for it. But that may be the reason they're trying to basically change the Constitution. The American people are waking up to just how much real wealth has been sucked out of their pockets by this banker governmental industrial complex. I'll come up with a better name for it during the break here. But that's why they want us disarmed. They're realizing that Americans, when they lose their homes, when they lose their savings, when they can't even eat, that's when they're going to get angry. We're going to take a break now for station identification. We're going to be back here with hour number 2. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are still closed because I got a lot of news to get through here today. Over in France, the country is going through a serious crisis. There's a rail strike, a major rail strike across the entire country against President Emmanuel Macron, who is basically trying to continue with a liberalizing overhaul of the nation and its infrastructure. And it's angered the rail workers, who are now conducting rolling strikes. And apparently 33% of all train staff and more than 75% of the drivers have walked out. And this is causing massive disruption all across France. People can't get where they need to go. They can't get to their jobs. Cargo cannot move. And it's a real serious situation over there. But we're starting to see people in all kinds of countries starting to push back at what people see as a very bad direction for their countries. Now, over in Russia, their independent SWIFT system, they don't call it SWIFT, it's something else, but it's a parallel to SWIFT, and it's all ready to go. They've got it set up and ready to launch, and Rosneft, which is the global oil giant, is saying they're ready to switch over in an instant if Russia gets shut out of the SWIFT system as part of Western sanctions. So they were very, very smart to get that up and running and online, because it looks like the U.S. is not going to back down. They're pushing for direct confrontation with Russia. Meanwhile, over in Africa, they have created their own equivalent of the World Trade Organization. All the African nations are getting together, and they're going to decide for themselves how to conduct trade amongst themselves. So all these Western-dominated systems and organizations, World Trade Organization, SWIFT, all of it, they're being bypassed. The rest of the world is just really sick and tired of Western hegemonic domination, because it's gone on for way too long, and it has not been fair. It has not been even-handed. It's basically seen as the face of Western imperialism. Now, interestingly enough, over in West Virginia, Governor Jim Justice has just signed into law a bill that says anybody receiving food stamps in West Virginia will have to work for them. an equivalent amount of work. You're getting the food stamps, but before you can accept them, you have to work so many hours in jobs that are being set up specially for food stamp recipients. Now, this may trim back some of the people who are just on food stamps because they don't want to work. The downside will be that people who are on food stamps who can't work may be harmed by it. So we'll see what's going to happen with that. Meanwhile, over in Oklahoma, where the teachers are on strike there for poor pay, it is coming to light that most of the teachers in Oklahoma, just to survive, have second and third jobs, and that some of those Oklahoma teachers are also on food stamps. And there are teachers who are out there working jobs. One of them is a rodeo announcer, which is kind of cool, kind of fun, doing cabinetry work, second teaching job in handicap centers. And teachers who are working those really, really long hours, they're going to be tired, they're going to be inattentive, they're not going to be focused in the classroom. Now, starting in 2019, the United States will give Israel $38 billion over the next 10 years. That's $3.8 billion per year, which is $10.41 million per day. Why are we not spending that money on our teachers? That's what I want to know. Well, because we're being ruled by a foreign puppet ruler. We have a Vichy government in Washington, D.C. They're ruling this country for the benefit of a foreign country, not for the American people or the American nation. Up in Germany, a Syrian refugee set fire to an apartment building and then blocked the exits. 1 dead, 17 injured as residents have to jump for their lives. 34 people have lost their homes. So how's that open border thing working out for you? Now, you're going to love this story, talking about caving into the New World Order. This happened in Germany, and there was this schoolgirl who was being beaten and bullied by Muslim students for having blonde hair, like that's her fault. She was beaten and bullied for not wearing a hijab. She was beaten for being Christian. The principal of the school decided he was going to solve this problem by advising the girl to put on a hijab. If I had a student in that school, they'd be out. Private school or homeschooling. When you have the school officials and the teachers pushing this New World Order, lets everybody blend in, the women all have to wear hijabs to keep the peace, that's it. That's the end of the line as far as I'm concerned. Now, Huntington Beach is joining the fight against sanctuary city status. The City Council voted 6-1 to sue the state of California over Senate Bill 54, which was the bill that would protect illegal immigrants by limiting cooperation between local police and ICE agents. Well, frankly, that entire Senate, everybody in that Senate who voted for Senate Bill 54 is in violation of Title 8. They should be arrested. And again, Trump may be building his wall, but I think he's doing that just for the publicity. Because if Trump were really serious about getting this illegal immigrant problem under control, he would just start enforcing Title 8. He'd start arresting these mayors and these governors and throwing them in prison. He'd start arresting employers who were employing illegal immigrants. He'd start arresting anybody who was providing housing to illegal immigrants or transporting illegal immigrants, because all of those are crimes under Title 8. We don't need new laws. We need to enforce the laws we have, and Donald Trump is not doing it. Another reason to suggest that he is not really in control. He's not really the boss. He's just a facade, a front for the people who are really in charge. Okay, let's do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog. Basically, liberals plan to wipe out Americans by blocking President Trump's border fixes. And yeah, the liberals are flooding this country with illegal immigrants in order to swing the November and 2020 elections, like they almost swung the 2016 election. We know millions of illegal immigrants voted in 2016. And all during the primary season, during the run-up, we were calling attention to the fact that all of these liberal Democratic lawyers were going from state to state trying to strike down voter ID laws, claiming it's racist. No, illegal is not a race. And if we're going to preserve our republic, and if we're going to preserve the right of the American citizen to choose our own leaders, then the non-citizens must be blocked from voting. This is an epidemic. It's totally out of control. It's shameful. And if Trump doesn't do something about it, he's going to lose Congress in November, which means he's probably going to be impeached. And if he survives impeachment, he's going to be a one-term president. And I don't understand why he doesn't understand that. The barbarians are at the gates. And the barbarians are being given voting privileges. Now, that caravan of illegal aliens appears to be unfazed by Trump's call to guard the Mexican border with the military. They're still on their way. Supposedly, sometime, actually today, the Mexican government is to try and break them up. We don't know if they're going to be successful or not. And by the way, as a clarification, Trump is sending the National Guard to the border, not the regular U.S. military. So all those liberals who are screaming about posse comitatus, sit down and shut the heck up. Now, photos and videos of this caravan are showing that the vast majority of them are young males. They look more like an army of invaders than refugees of any kind. And by the way, the other day I noted that in photos of this caravan, the people who were guiding them along were wearing these orange reflective vests. There were no police. And I said, it looks like some NGO is behind this. And as it turns out, yes, and they are funded by George Soros. Story from allnewspipeline.com, is the caravan invasion an act of war upon America? Because unarmed invasions are the grand strategy of covert warfare. And it does make sense. But yes, anytime a body of foreigners, armed or not, cross the border of another nation without permission, it is an invasion, and it should be treated as one. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is threatening to cut off all foreign aid to Honduras because the vast majority of the people in this caravan came from Honduras. Now, what I want to know is, we've seen photos of Mexico's southern border, and it has a wall, and it has barbed wire, and it is very well protected. Why did Mexico let these Hondurans in to cross over to the United States? Isn't Mexico supposed to be guarding their own border? We've been hearing all these stories. If you cross into Mexico without permission, you go to jail. It's a huge mess. And of course, Trump is pointing out that the reason we're in this mess is that our immigration protections were stripped under the Obama administration. He's saying Obama made changes that basically said there was no border. No argument there. That's what the liberals have been arguing for. You know, a borderless world. Everybody can go anywhere they want. And look what it's done to Europe. Look what it's doing to the United States of America. We're all being dragged down to the same third world standard of living. And that, of course, is what the globalists want. Like any other fascist institution, they want all the wealth for themselves and everybody else on the verge of starvation, because that makes them helpless and easy to control. Now, in 4 separate incidents over the Easter weekend, agents from the U.S. Border Patrol Swanton sector arrested 20 aliens illegal entering the U.S. in New York, Vermont, and New Hampshire. These illegals were from Guatemala and Haiti, entering from Canada. Well, how did they get into Canada? The U.S. has now arrested 99 members of the MS-13 gang who got into the United States as unaccompanied minors. 64 of these gang members have been granted special immigrant juvenile status by the U.S. government. Now, MS-13, These are real bad hombres. They're very much involved in the drug trade. They are ultra, ultra violent. And they're flooding into our country. Now go on out and do a web search for MS-13 in Mexico and see what they've done down there. Now, a lot of people are still talking about how the Democrats are trying to obstruct what Trump is trying to do for immigration. But the hard reality is that there is a law already on the books called the Insurrection Act, which gives Donald Trump the power to just go ahead and build the wall and to end sanctuary status in states. And he doesn't need any legislative approval to do it. If you read that Insurrection Act, the president, he's got the authority, but he's not doing it. We have an impotent president. He's not in charge. He's not the boss. And that means we're living in some kind of a multi-party dictatorship, a triumvirate maybe, or however many. It's sending a message. It doesn't matter who we vote for, because the politicians in Congress have very little authority. The president, at least in this case, seems to have almost none. The strings are all being pulled by the neocons behind the scenes, the senior executive service, the bureaucracy. And we, the people, have no voice at all, and that means this is a dictatorship. Now, there's an article that came on out, my new rules to save America. It's 3 rules, and they make sense. It's common sense. We don't know why they're not the laws. But the article goes, conservatives aren't against immigration. That's true. We love legal immigrants, immigrants who want to work, not live on welfare. So we need a 7-year ban on welfare for immigrants. And Donald Trump was talking about something like that, but it hasn't happened yet. New rule number 2, okay, we have to stop illegal aliens from voting. They're voting by the millions, especially in California and in Nevada. Remember, CNN's poll 10 days before the election showed Trump winning Nevada by 7 points. Then he lost by 27,000 votes. Why? Well, CNN's poll was only polling the legal American citizens. Now, Trump lost the whole country popular vote by 2.9 million votes, but lost California by over 4 million votes. You can bet the 10 million illegal immigrants who live in California, or rather 5 million are illegal, provided the entire margin of popular vote for Hillary Clinton. So she didn't really win the popular vote, because the popular vote is supposed to be among legal American citizens entitled to vote. And illegal citizens, illegal immigrants are not supposed to vote. They're not supposed to register to vote. They're not supposed to get driver's licenses. They do not, in fact, have any rights in this country if they come in here illegally. They're criminals. And they're being welcomed with the red carpet. The illegal immigrants and the refugees are getting better treatment than the American citizens. I was talking with a friend of mine about, the hoops we have to jump through to renew our driver's licenses here in Hawaii. We have to show a birth certificate and a passport and our original Social Security card, which is rather hard for people in our 60s. My card dissolved back during the Nixon years. Meanwhile, if you're in California and you're an illegal immigrant, they're just handing them out. It might be easier for me to leave the country, sneak in across the border, learn how to speak Spanish, and say, I'm an illegal immigrant, I need a new driver's license. Trump needs to pass an executive order mandating immediate deportation for any non-citizen voting in our elections. The problem is, how do you tell they're non-citizens? They're not required to show ID. The people who are working in those precincts, they don't even know if the person that's standing in front of them is really the person they just crossed off the voter rolls. It's wide open for fraud. We have the most pro-fraud election system on planet Earth, and it is shameful. Now, President Trump needs to build the wall. He promised it would be paid for by Mexico. Mexico's balking at that. But there are three ways the wall would be paid for without costing U.S. taxpayers a dime. By eliminating welfare for illegal immigrants for the first 7 years, that will pay for the wall. Lowered costs for law enforcement dealing with MS-13 gangs and other illegal immigrant and refugee crime will pay for the wall. We have to look at all these policies of the U.S. government that are just a drain on the Treasury: illegal immigration, refugees, the wars, all the money being given to foreign governments. And then you understand why the quality of life for the American people who are expected to pay for it all is in decline. The American people should be very upset. They should be angry with what's going on. And they shouldn't be complacent. I'm not encouraging violence, but I think the time has come for people to start allowing themselves to be angry. To heck with anger management, I am pissed off. That should be the new slogan for the American people. Now, the latest poll is showing that nearly 2 out of every 3 Americans say they support the 2020 census asking if residents are U.S. citizens. We have to have a way of determining if that person who is voting in that polls has the legal right to do so. Because the Democrats are using the illegal immigrant vote to try and keep themselves in power. They don't have any policies. They don't have any planks. They don't have any agendas that the majority of Americans can identify with. Most Americans right now have a bad taste of the Democrats coming out of 2016. We have to get our election system under control. We have to block the illegal immigrants from voting. They're not entitled to vote. They have no rights here at all. We'll be back after these commercials. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here. Now, over in Great Britain, George Galloway is out there warning that phony Tony Blair is still calling all the shots and that Britain is heading towards a Brexit in name only, and that Tony Blair's goal is to keep Great Britain tangled up in the European Union. Now, Tony Blair is a globalist, and right now the globalists are very concerned that one of their foundations for the New World Order, the European Union, is starting to come apart. And they're pulling out all the stops to prevent that from happening. To heck with what the people on the ground want. They dream of a one world government and a single golden throne of planet Earth. And they're all hoping that one day their own rear end will get a chance to polish that seat. And these people, I think they've lost their sense of perspective just with these dreams of glory. That they actually say, it could actually happen. I could actually rule the world one day. And I want that. And that's always been one of my concerns about a global government anyway. We have seen in all political structures, no matter the size, that there are going to be individuals who covet that top position so much they'll do anything to get it. And then once they have that power, they're willing to do anything with it. And that really shows the brilliance of Thomas Jefferson's design for the United States of America. The Founding Fathers understood the curse of political power is that it attracts the very sort of people who should not be allowed to have it. And that the government that serves the people and the nation, or for that matter, the planet, the best, is one that limits that top power, that has checks and balances, that has rival factions in separate branches of the government supposedly keeping watch on each other. But Jefferson said he didn't expect his daring experiment to last more than 100 years. And he was pretty much right. We had the Civil War, and right after the Civil War, Thomas Jefferson's original vision for the United States started getting chipped away bit by bit, amendment by amendment, until we have this imperial Washington, D.C., now trying to basically conquer the rest of the world. I got an interesting email here responding to my comment about barbarians at the gate. He says, is it not a tried and true tactic to bring down empires with hordes of invading barbarians? These inbred, brain-dead globalists can only follow the old plans prepared by others, either from ancient times or by real humans. Now, a lot of people are getting very concerned about the ongoing attacks on Jeremy Corbyn And let's see, there was something down here I need to look at real quick. Yeah, it has to do with Jeremy Corbyn. He's been the target of allegations of anti-Semitism. Now, he has a reputation of being anti-racism, but they're trying to basically smear him as an anti-Semite to get him to basically surrender to Labor's Israel lobby. And apparently this has been going on for 3 years, where Israel supporters are trying to basically get the Labor Party under their control. But interestingly enough, over Passover, Jeremy Corbyn accepted an invitation to a Seder with the Judas, which are apparently the wrong kind of Jews, according to the Zionist lobby. So they're still attacking him, which is just really, really absurd. But again, Great Britain has as much a problem with their Israel lobby as the United States has with our own. Now, it's interesting in that there was this, I think it was Al Jazeera, did a documentary on the British Israel lobby that aired in Britain. They've done one about the Israel lobby here in the US, and it still cannot be aired here. I'm hoping somebody will eventually put it up on YouTube and we can look at it. But it is important to understand that our politicians really serve two masters. And if you go back to the Bible, no one can serve two masters. He will love the one and hate the other. And if you look at how much the U.S. government is giving away to Israel and supporting Israel at the expense of our teachers, our students, our infrastructure, you come to understand that our government isn't serving two masters. It's serving a foreign master. And it cannot, does not, and will not serve the American people and the American nation. Now, Netanyahu, just hours after saying they had a deal that would let 16,000 migrants stay in Israel and the rest would go to Europe or someplace else, he's now suspended it. Apparently there was a huge hue and cry. The people of Israel want the African migrants out, and they don't care what it looks like to the rest of the world. So now Netanyahu's back to the drawing board on that one. Okay, we're coming up here on another commercial break. When we come on back, more about globalism, more about, well, everything. We got science, we got medicine, we got tech, we got all kinds of stuff to talk about. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha America, welcome back to the show. Now, as you've noticed in recent weeks, Hungary is really straining at the leashes of the EU, and they are sounding the alarm about the coming global government. So Laszlo Kover, Speaker of the National Assembly of Hungary, is out there warning of a coming, what he calls anti-human global government that will strip away religious, national, even our sexual identities. And we're certainly seeing that with all of this ridiculous gender fluid nonsense. And he's basically saying they're working to erase individualism and create a homogenous, borderless world of mind-controlled atheists. Looks like George Lucas wasn't far off the bat with THX 1138. And he says they want to strip people of their identities so they're no longer able to recognize, express, or enforce their own interests. That does seem to be where it's headed. Almost like H.G. Wells. We could split into two species, the Eloi and the Morlock. And you need to remember what happened to the Eloi. Now, over in Baltimore, they're starting to see an exodus of population, mostly of the middle and upper classes. It used to be called white flight, but that was deemed a racist term here. But apparently, Baltimore, which has been under Democratic control for a long time, they have high crime, high taxes, high rates of violent crime and murder, and it's basically caused by the Baltimore government, who have created this unsustainable climate of overtaxation and complete fiscal irresponsibility. And that seems to be the way Democrats are thinking. And again, it gets back to all this money that is being spent on these illegal immigrants and these refugees at the expense of the legal American citizens. We're in the bread and circuses phase here. The Democrats are running the arena. The illegal immigrants and the refugees are sitting in the Coliseum getting their free bread. And as long as they cheer on the emperor, all will be well. Now, down in Orlando, there's apparently this wife of a Democratic congressman got kind of drunk at the Disney park, and they very gently tried to walk her on out and put her in an Uber car along with her mother. And the woman began swearing at the driver and the sheriff, at which point she was arrested, and she kept screaming that because she's the wife of a congressman, she can do whatever she wants. And there's another insight into the mindset of members of Congress here. Now, here's a very alarming story, and this just came on out. You know about the stingrays. These are the phony cell phone sites police use to spy on people. It's a cell phone tower simulator where it'll intercept the cell phone signals so that they can be examined. Then it will forward the signal onto the regular cell network. Well, the Department of Homeland Security has discovered that there are multiple rogue cell phone site simulators all over Washington, D.C., and they don't know who put them there. It's certainly not part of the police operation, and the concern is it's part of a system to spy on members of Congress and other government officials. And in a March 26th letter to Oregon Senator Ron Wyden, the Department of Homeland Security acknowledged that last year it identified suspected unauthorized cell site simulators in the nation's capital. The agency said it had not determined the type of devices in use or who might have been operating them. Well, let's narrow this down. Which foreign nation has absolutely unfettered access to come and go as they please inside the United States? And I'll give you a hint, it's probably the same nation that was caught running the largest ever foreign spy ring inside the United States back in 2001. And I think the fact that these bogus cell phone site simulators are already installed and running tells us that the Department of Homeland Security utterly failed to do their job. Now, in the realm of political correctness, you're going to love this one. The University of Vermont, they had a special debate tournament this past weekend. And apparently, somebody expressed the concern that women might get raped if they dare to debate men. So this college debate tournament banned all men. And this event was called the North American Women's and Gender Minorities Debate Championship. It was supposed to be an open debate tournament. But women might get raped, so we're going to kick out the men. Talk about discrimination on the basis of sex. Somebody ought to file a lawsuit on that one. All right, let's talk about recent events involving the right to keep and bear arms. And we're going to go back on down here to Florida because there's this kid, Kyle Kashuv. And he is apparently more conservative than some of his classmates. He was on Face the Nation and basically said that banning large magazines won't solve the problem. Banning sporting rifles will not solve the problem. You need better security at the schools. And the host, Margaret Brennan, asked, was he invited to speak at the March for Our Lives in Washington, D.C., and he said, no, he was not, because they only wanted gun grabbers there. They didn't want alternative suggestions. They didn't want transparent backpacks. They didn't want additional school security. The gun grabbers have one agenda, and that is repeal of the Second Amendment and confiscation of all weapons. And again, the reality is, where law-abiding people are allowed to have guns, crime and violence goes down. Look at Chicago, held up as a model of gun control legislation. One of the highest murder rates in the country. Now, Kyle Kashuv may have a defamation case against Kurt Eichenwald, because apparently during an email exchange that went public with commentator Ben Shapiro, liberal journalist Kurt Eichenwald made several comments about Kyle Kashuv. And basically, Eichenwald said, I consulted a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist, a political conservative, since that seems so important to you. And based on what he read, the psychiatrist said the following. 1, Kyle is in desperate need of psychiatric help or support. The psychiatrist did not have enough information to assess if the issues he saw in the conversation were the consequences of the shooting, being unprepared for being thrust into the conservative media as a go-to kid, or if there's an underlying pathology that preceded these events. 2, Kyle is obsessed with you. In fact, our DM conversation, which involved a lot of irrational rage, seemed to have been sparked by my asking you to debate. Now, Kyle Kashuv lives in Florida, so that would be the jurisdiction. Here is the problem. First of all, the psychiatrist has been unnamed. Second of all, a real psychiatrist is going to say, absent an actual in-person interview, it is impossible to make any kind of a diagnosis. This psychiatrist claims to be able to diagnose Kyle just on the basis of Kyle's writings. We went through that nonsense once before when the Democrats were coming up with all these psychiatrists who said, oh, Donald Trump is insane. We can tell he's insane from his speeches. We can tell he's insane from his tweets. No, that really is impossible. So Eichenwald has likely published a false statement. He's accusing Kyle Kashuv of being mentally ill, which, by the way, is an old tactic right out of the old Soviet Union. If somebody was saying something that was against the official government agenda, they were declared mentally ill. They'd get locked up in a mental hospital in order to discredit them. Oh, don't listen to them. He just got out of the nut house. But that's the kind of tactics they're using. They're using Soviet Union-style tactics on the American people to try and repeal the Second Amendment. Now, Republican politicians in Virginia Beach were criticized for putting up a pro-gun ad that featured photos of children's shoes at Auschwitz. And apparently somebody hacked into this Republican group and put the post up there. And so it was a bit of a hoax. And this is what you do. You hack in, you put something offensive up, and then everybody jumps on and said, oh, you are being offensive. It's just another way to smear them. And although the hoax, though, the history is, in fact, correct. Germany started disarming Jews in 1933, and the police were ordered not to grant gun permits specifically to Jews from 1936 onward. In 1938, Jews were forbidden to own guns and non-cooking knives. And what followed after that, the Jews were rounded up and thrown into the slave labor camps, along with the gypsies and the gays and the mentally ill and a whole bunch of other Untermenschen. Every genocide of the 20th century was preceded by a gun ban on the targeted population. And that, for no other reason, you should hang on to your guns. We're hearing all this talk about how white males are bad. Whiteness is bad. We're in the crosshairs right now. Look at what happened in Zimbabwe. Look at what's happening right now in South Africa. It could potentially happen here if we are all disarmed. And let's not forget, King George III would have loved today's gun control movement. Because had there been a gun control movement back in colonial times, we would still be a part of the British Empire. Remember what we said yesterday about these Yemeni women who were protesting the rape of a Yemeni girl by a Saudi soldier. And they were all there at this protest carrying guns. And that tells you one reason why Yemen has been able to resist the Saudi military might all this time. Now, the good news is not all companies are catering or pandering to the anti-gun movement. Some of them are standing firm. And we need to support those. Sportswear company Alexo Athletica has debuted a line of yoga pants with pockets specially designed to carry guns and knives. And apparently these so-called carry-wear pants have sold out. A handful of online merchants have resorted to offering their customers gun financing. And these layaway plans are a godsend. And what's really interesting, we're seeing the left, they're out there tireless in their pursuit of gun censorship. Now, these are the same people who used to tout their First Amendment right to freedom of speech, and they're now calling for popular streaming services like Amazon, Google, Apple, and Roku to remove NRI TV from their platform. YouTube has already banned all videos relating to gun safety and gun training. They're already banned. They just want to send the message, guns are bad. Guns are bad. You don't even want to look at a gun. If you look at a gun, you'll go blind. If you touch a gun, your hand will fall off. Now, a former Eagle River student at Eagle River High School posted a photo of a gun on Twitter, and that got him barred from the prom. And all the Twitter post was it's a gun that he liked. A High Point model 4595, a 45 ACP semi-automatic rifle. It wasn't directed toward anybody, wasn't talking about violence. He was just sharing what he liked. And what's really odd about this is this took place in Alaska. And in Alaska, guns are quite common due to how many people hunt and the need to protect oneself and livestock from wild animals. If you look at any of these shows that are reality shows up there in the Arctic, you'll see guns everywhere. And so the idea that this Alaskan high school banned this guy from the prom for putting up a photo of a gun he wanted to own, that really does tell you that the entire educational system of the United States has been co-opted by the liberal Democratic gun grabber agenda. Now, David Hogg is out there screaming and crying about Laura Ingraham. Laura apparently did a story about how a lot of colleges have turned down his application for attendance. Apparently they don't want to get tangled up in the controversy. And David Hogg just went totally ballistic, demanded an apology from Laura Ingraham, which she gave him, which I think was a mistake because she was reporting the news on this situation. So now David Hogg and his cult, which is what it really is, they're going after all of Laura Ingraham's advertisers, and right now they're targeting Arby's. We're going to boycott Arby's because they supported Laura Ingraham, who pointed out that I can't get into colleges. So that does it. After the show today, I'm getting lunch at Arby's, and I suggest you all do the same and tell them why. Very interesting little article here. USA Today, and it's talking about this debacle down in Florida where the widow of Omar Mateen, who we are told killed 49 people in his attack on Orlando's Pulse nightclub in June of 2016. And it was the biggest terrorism case of the year, and it imploded thanks to FBI misconduct and deceit. The entire case was based on the FBI's claim that Noor Salman had signed a confession after being interrogated for 18 hours, and the confession was drafted by an FBI agent. And apparently she was threatened that unless she signed this confession, that the government was going to take her child away. She's got an infant son, and they said, you sign this or you never see your kid again. That sounds to me like a kidnapping and extortion case right there. Now, Solomon only has an IQ of 84, and she had denied during the 18 hours of the interviews that she had any knowledge of what was going on. But she was coerced into signing this confession. And so the FBI went into this court with the biggest terrorism case of the year, and when the jury heard what had really gone on down, they said no. And so now the FBI has been caught once again, framing innocent people to get terrorism headlines. And it's a legitimate question. How do we trust the FBI after this? How could anybody trust the FBI? And this is not just one occurrence. The FBI helped frame James Earl Ray. Go back and study the history of COINTELPRO, or Ruby Ridge, or Waco, Texas, or the Oklahoma City bombing. You have to be a fool to trust the FBI. And let's not forget, the father of Omar Mateen was an FBI informant. That came out in this court case. So the idea that this guy was going to go in and shoot up this nightclub and nobody expected it to happen, he was set up. He was the patsy. Because every time there's a false flag terror or gun attack, somebody has to be sacrificed. That's the patsy, preferably a dead patsy. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, over in Germany, the head of Germany's second largest police union has responded to recent reports of anti-Semitism in the schoolyard by saying that authorities should be allowed to take children away from anti-Semitic parents. And of course, the government gets to decide if they're anti-Semitic or not. And don't forget, Israel's agenda is to blur the line between anti-Semitism and criticism of the actions of Israel's government. So what they're really talking about here in Germany is if parents criticize what Israel is doing in Palestine or the actions of the Israel lobby in their country, they are at risk of having their children taken away. Talk about a dictatorship. And again, anti-Semitism is an unreasoning hatred of people for having Semitic ancestry. That's it. That's the textbook definition. But we're not talking about people who hate Semites just for being Semites. We are talking about people who have a legitimate criticism of the actions of the few individuals at the top of the Israeli government and what they are doing to their neighbors and indeed the rest of the world. Now, I don't know what the free speech laws are in Germany, but I know here in the United States of America, our First Amendment, which, by the way, the Israel lobby really hates, they're trying to lobby for a Palestinian exception to the First Amendment. But we have a right to criticize the actions of government, anywhere in the world. Certainly we're being encouraged to criticize anything that Russia does or North Korea does. But if they get a Palestinian exception to the First Amendment in this country, then we no longer have free speech, we have permitted speech. And that is another sign of growing dictatorship in this country. Now, the other day we were talking about this coordinator counselor in Bridgeport, Connecticut High School, Carl Lemon. And he was basically out there saying that he just wanted to execute white people. And apparently a teacher heard this guy say he couldn't wait for the Panthers to give the okay and a revolution begins. Well, he finally got arrested and he's been suspended. And yeah, it should be. We don't need a race war. But at this point, it looks like, again, it's a repeat of what happened back during COINTELPRO. The U.S. government deliberately inciting black against white hostility to keep everybody angry with each other and not paying attention to what the government was doing. And they're doing it all over again. And the extent to which they're doing it suggests that they're much more worried about hiding things today than they were back in the 1960s. Meanwhile, according to the latest poll, 82% of Americans believe the United States has become an Orwellian dystopia in which the government spies on our every move. If that many Americans are aware of that, it means we in the independent media are winning the war with the corporate media. We're getting the truth out there. The truth is known. And I think that's a really good thing. Another poll conducted by Monmouth University is showing that 77% of Americans think that the corporate media is guilty of fake news. And that, too, is a very positive sense. Now, as you know, there's this video that was made up of TV newscasters at all the TV stations owned by Sinclair Broadcasting saying exactly the same thing, exactly the same way. It has gone viral all over the web, leading to accusations that it's all one-sourced, that all the news is completely controlled in this country. All the corporate news is controlled in this country. Obviously, the independent media is not. That's why we call ourselves the independent media. We'll be right back after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. Now, we're talking about Sinclair Broadcasting. We're talking about this video that was put together from newscasts at all the small local stations owned by Sinclair Broadcasting, in which the newscasters are saying exactly the same thing, exactly the same way. Now, this isn't really a surprise because Conan O'Brien has been doing this as a comedy shtick on his program for quite some time now. But for some reason, this particular video let's see. Okay, this particular video has gone viral and has fueled the view that all of corporate media is under control from a single source. And so now, in what I view as a very alarming sign, Donald Trump is defending Sinclair Broadcasting and basically saying that, yeah, it's okay, it's all the same news, it doesn't really matter. Well, this goes against how media was originally set up in the United States of America. Originally, there were laws to limit ownership of media in the same market, so that no one entity owned all the newspapers or all the radio and then later on all the TV, in order to preserve a diversity of opinion. So you would have a liberal newspaper, you would have a conservative newspaper, you would have a liberal radio station, you'd have a conservative radio station, and both sides of the argument had equal access to print and airtime so that the American people could be fully informed and make good choices in the best Jeffersonian sense of the word. But over time, going on back to, well, it started really accelerating during the first Iraq War, where the U.S. government went to the largest media corporations that were being limited by laws as to how much media they could own. And they said, look, if you will cover this war the way we want it to be covered, then we will rescind those laws limiting your ownership. And that's exactly what happened. And these large media concerns began gobbling up the small independent TV, radio, and newspapers all across the country, to the point where today it is all one monolithic lump being controlled from the top. And I find it very alarming that Donald Trump, who felt the wrath of this organized corporate media in 2016, is all of a sudden on their side. It's another indicator to me he's not really in control. He has been corralled, collared, threatened, blackmailed. I really do not know. It doesn't really matter. He's not in charge. That's becoming more and more obvious every day that goes by. Now, Facebook, despite its recent scandals, is still on out there doing some pretty ridiculous and damaging things. Facebook has rejected an advertisement by a Catholic college for an online theology program, declaring that the ad contained shocking, sensational, or excessively violent content. The image in question is an image of Jesus on the cross. And according to the university's web communications director, Tom Crow, Facebook rejected the ad, stating, your image, video, thumbnail, or video can't contain shocking, sensational, or excessively violent content. Maybe this is Zuckerberg's way of celebrating Passover. This one's just a little bit out there. For people who still hold any modicum of respect for our judicial system just because they wear those funny-looking robes here. Over at the New York Court of Appeals, they have had to suspend a Suffolk County District Court judge, Robert Sekeli, who was arrested last week and charged with burglary after he was caught with women's underwear that he allegedly stole from a private residence. Kinky. Our nation is going crazy. The lunatics really are in charge of the asylum. Now, do you remember the affluenza teen? This is a guy named Ethan Couch, and he was arrested for drunkenly plowing his vehicle into a group of people, assisting a stranded driver in 2013, killing 4 people. And his defense attorney and a psychologist declared that this teenager suffered from affluenza, which was a condition in which you're so rich that you don't know right from wrong. And it upset a lot of people. It touched off a conversation about privilege, and it made Couch famous. And in the end, he didn't get locked up for killing 4 people, but for violating probation years later. He never went to jail for the original crime. He was put on probation. He violated probation. They threw him in jail. He's out again now. Now, when this kid hit these people, he had a blood alcohol level 3 times the legal limit, as well as weed and Valium in his system. Now, just imagine for a moment that you're out there on the roadway you have been drinking heavily, you have 3 times the legal limit of alcohol in your bloodstream, you've been smoking marijuana, you've been taking Valium, and you have an accident. Do you think you're going to get probation? It really does show that the ultra-rich are being treated differently by our system. We have become feudalist. There's the serfs, which is you and I and pretty much everybody we know. And then there's the nobility, like this Ethan Couch, who are allowed to get away with things because they are the nobility. They have, after all, money. And money is the only measure of a human being in our society. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And yeah, we know people who've gotten away with murder because they're rich, or there's a lot of money that depends on their continued freedom. It's kind of interesting all these years later to be checking out at the local supermarket and to see these tabloids finally owning up to the fact that Natalie Wood's drowning was not an accident and that Robert Wagner is the person of interest in that death. Well, there were only 3 people there: Natalie Wood, Robert Wagner, and Chris Walken. Now, Mark Zuckerberg is admitting Facebook scans the contents of all your private messenger texts. If you are using the Facebook app on your smartphone, Facebook is scanning all of your private text messages to siphon off more data for their database. This is the latest blow to hit an already scandal-plagued company. And people are starting to get off Facebook. Now, let's see. Where's the one about Chrome? I hope I didn't lose that one. All right, let's get on back here. This is an interesting little story about how some of these smart devices inadvertently can lead to some good. Now, apparently, there was a situation where a woman was killed, and the woman was Mima Nilsson, and the daughter claimed that the home had been invaded by criminals, that the mother had begged with them for hours to spare their lives, and then the bad guys had killed the mother and left. But the prosecutor basically went into the victim's smartwatch, an iWatch, an Apple iWatch. Most people may not know this. There is a pulse monitor on the underside of the watch, so that while you're exercising, the iWatch will tell you what your pulse rate is and your blood oxygen level, all kinds of nifty things like that. And apparently the data on the watch didn't line up with the timeline given by the daughter, and as a result, the daughter was arrested and charged with murdering her own mother. So if you're having tensions with your family members, good reason to get an iWatch there. Half of European flights are facing delays after a massive computer failure. This happened toward the end of last week, I think. 500,000 air passengers facing delays and cancellations. Apparently there was a systems failure at the Eurocontrol Center in Brussels, which coordinates the air traffic control for all member nations of the EU. And it's supposed to match demand from airlines with capacity in the crowded skies over Europe. Airlines will file a flight plan. ETFMS calculates a pathway according to data on available airspace and allocates the slots accordingly. Obviously something that is necessary in those crowded skies, but obviously something that can be a real problem if it goes down. Now, why they didn't have a backup system ready to switch in a split second, I don't know. Maybe they're being cheap. Maybe they were being hacked. Now, as you know, the latest thing to try and foil car thieves are the so-called keyless cars. And I'm not talking just about the key that has a fob that can remotely unlock your doors. I'm talking about the fob where you can just open the car door, and just by the presence of the fob, the car will know it's you, and it will let you into the car and let you push the start button. The days of actually putting the ignition key in the slot and turning it appear to be over for the newer cars. Came out first on the high-end cars, now it's getting on down to the mid-range cars. Seems like a great convenience, but unfortunately, car thieves have already worked a very simple way around it. What they'll do is they'll work in teams of 2, and there will be one thief who will go up to the side of the house where you are, carrying a little box, which is a repeater. It's a very sensitive receiver and a very powerful transmitter. The second crook goes to the car, and he also has a box. When he lifts the car handle on the door, the car sends out the little signal that's supposed to go to the fob. His box receives it, retransmits it to the box up by the house, and it's retransmitted into the house at a much higher power level. The fob hears it, sends back the signal. The box at the house picks up that signal, forwards it back to the box by the car, and the car unlocks. And as a result, thefts have tripled as thieves exploit this technology. We've made our technology too decadent. The more whiz-bang we make it, the more easy it is for people to get around it. I still like the good old-fashioned pin tumbler lock, but they don't even make those very strong. That's how they were able to basically get into my Honda. The key in the lock is worthless. A screwdriver and a plier, the lock is broken. Even on the club. We had a club on that car. Those are easy. They're basically sold to make people feel their car can't be stolen. Obviously, it didn't work. Now, I know a little bit about locks because years ago when I was a professional magician, I spent a little of my time, pardon me, learning to be an escape artist and learning how to open locks and learning how locks work. And I got to see all kinds of locks from the very good ones down to the very cheap ones. And I remember going into one of the big box retailers, I'm not going to say who it was, and just noticing they had a nice line of very ornate front door latch and lock assemblies, and noticing that the cylinder where the pins were was actually made out of plastic, and just wondering, what were these people thinking? And car locks, given how much of a problem car theft is, car locks ought to be very heavy duty. They really ought to be. But everybody's trying to manufacture the cheapest product possible, and they're manufacturing products that are easy to get past, easy to pick, easy to just break with a screwdriver. And as a final note on this, if you are somebody who uses locks, like especially padlocks, spend the money to get something good. Those low-end cheapies are utterly worthless. If you have an expensive bicycle, buy an expensive lock to go with it. The best are the ones that have the little cylindrical key. Those are much, much harder to pick. They can be picked, but it takes a very, very long time to do it. Get something that's case hardened. Don't get anything that's got any plastic in it anywhere. Now, the other day I was talking about the reason for cybercrime being such a major problem is lack of enforcement. Hardly anybody goes to jail. Somebody who decides on a life of crime, well, if I go rob a convenience store, there's a 1 in 30 chance I'm going to go to jail. If I rob a bank, there's a 1 in maybe 6 chance I'm going to go to jail. I don't know what the real numbers are. I'm just making them up here. But apparently, according to this story in the Daily Mail, just 1 out of every 100 crimes on the internet ends with a conviction, and 99% of the cyber criminals just basically escape justice. And it may even be worse than that, because the police commissioner says the systems couldn't cope with the traffic if all reports of cybercrime were being passed on. And apparently, City of London Police Commissioner Ian Dyson said that you are more likely to have money taken from you online than you are in the street. And the officers, who's also been a victim of card fraud, said that some online scams are so simple to set up, he questioned why any criminals would ever bother to rob a bank again. Intel is now admitting, we're going to go ahead and open up the phone lines now. Intel is now admitting that it's not going to be possible to fix that Spectre V2 flaw in some of their processors. They haven't been able to find a way to patch around that vulnerability. And every patch they've tried to put in there has slowed the processor way down. And more to the point, in some cases, it's bricked the devices. Apparently, security researchers at Embeddy have disclosed a critical vulnerability or a possible NSA-mandated backdoor in Cisco iOS software and Cisco iOS XE software that could allow an unauthenticated remote attacker to execute arbitrary code, taking full control over the vulnerable network equipment and intercept traffic. Now, Embeddy has published technical details and proof of concept after Cisco released patch updates to address this. I don't know about you, but I get really tired of constantly patching and updating everything. Sometimes I think that somebody ought to just come up with a design that is simple and elegant and is known to be, secure, and then just burn it permanently into the silicon with no writable memory anywhere. Now, over at Appnik and Cloudflare, they have announced a new service to protect people who do not want their internet browsing history being sold. They've set up a new DNS resolver service. It's simply 1.1.1.1. Now, DNS stands for domain name service. And when you go to a browser and you type in whatreallyhappened.com, your browser goes to a DNS resolver and says whatreallyhappened.com, at which point the service sends back the actual physical IP of the machine on which the website runs, 65. Blah, 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 blah. But if you're going through a DNS resolver service that is owned by, for example, Google, and Google does run one, or Facebook, or your local ISP, they are free to scan your browsing history and see what websites you are visiting and sell that information to marketers. And especially for those who enjoy a little adult entertainment late in the evening, you're probably not wanting them to know that. So good for Appnik and Cloudflare. All right, let's take a few phone calls here. Jeff in Georgia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, great show as usual.
Thank you.
I've called in many times and talked about how the banking oligarchy is trying to take away our free speech, and because of their ownership of the media, is just creating ethnic and racial strife, which as Christians we have to oppose this. But yesterday, to show you the deception, I've called in before about the Russian hoax, and I've stated, and I think you may have disagreed with me, that I believe that it's this same oligarchy that created the Russian hoax. I mean, they had players like Mueller and Rosenstein, but yesterday they sentenced a Dutch man, Alex van der Swal, to 30 days in prison. Interestingly, he had ties to Manafort or one of them guys, but that guy had a tie back to a Ukrainian billionaire. Well, van der Swal's wife is hooked in. I mean, van der Swal's wife is the daughter of a billionaire, and she's either Ukrainian or Russian. Michael,
Jeff, you've only got a few seconds left. You got to get to the point.
Okay, the point is it's another false flag. Thank you.
All right. Well, we know that they're lying about Skripal being the fault of the Russians. It definitely is. Anyway, we're going to take another break for commercials. We got a couple more callers waiting on the line, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go right back to the phones. Chuck in Texas. Aloha, Chuck. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Chuck, are you there? Going once, going twice. Okay, let's move on to Steve Elkins. Steve, welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
The case back in 2013, the affluent teen that got away with the murdering of 4 people, which brought back April 6th is the opening of the new movie at Chappaquiddick. You being a Hollywood buff, I wondered if you were planning on watching the movie.
Not really, because like so many other Hollywood movies about historical events, it's going to be an attempt to rewrite the history and then cement that mythologized version into the minds of the public. And having been very much looking into Chappaquiddick at the time it happened. And I have family on Martha's Vineyard, and they provided a lot of inside information. I seriously doubt it's going to be an honest telling of what really went down.
I agree. I'll just wait till it comes to Redbox or comes on my HBO. I agree.
Okay.
Hey, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye. Thanks an awful lot. And we're going to go to Sheldon in Idaho. Aloha, Sheldon. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Sheldon, are you there? Okay. We seem to be having some problems with the phone lines today. Okay. Now then. Apparently, Google users are very upset. They have discovered that Chrome's built-in antivirus tool is scanning private files on their computers without telling them. There we are. Now then, apparently there is a tool called Chrome Cleanup Tool. Now, this was a browser component added in 2014 to scan and remove malicious or resource-heavy software. It was originally an optional add-on for Chrome and was made available to let users get rid of malware and bloatware they may have unintentionally installed. But in October of last year, Google rebranded it and made it a compulsory part of the Chrome installation without users' knowledge. Now, that, I think, is going to upset a lot of people. It has upset a lot of people, both because of wondering just what Google is siphoning out of all the files on our computers, and also because Chrome has a reputation for being a resource hog. You can have a single Chrome window open, and if you go into the task manager, you will see multiple Chrome processes running at the same time. So as far as I'm concerned, it's time to find another browser. All right, let's take some more phone calls here. We're going to start with Rick in North Carolina. Aloha, Rick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, are you familiar with the Alamos Park, Texas rally this weekend, Saturday?
No, I'm not.
With the open carry, the First Amendment, where the town is shutting down the whole town and threatening violence against the people trying to do open carry and First Amendment audits.
Well, it does. Yeah, it's a crackdown. We were talking just yesterday about this anti-gun person who was out there saying, if we have to murder half the population of the U.S. to get the guns, it's time to do it. And it's rather stunning when you realize they think we, the law-abiding gun owners, are the violent ones. And yet all the talk about violence and killing is coming from the anti-gunners.
Yeah, that's right. And one more thing, could they possibly be building the wall to keep us in?
It could very well be, but I think as they flood the country with more illegal immigrants, it does seem like they want the white males to leave.
That's all I have, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot, and we're going to start with Kevin in West Virginia. Kevin, I'm probably going to have to take you through the commercial break, but what's on your mind?
What's on my mind? Hey, Mr. Mike. What's on my mind is what you were talking about earlier with Governor Justice and the food stamp thing. Yeah. Could you flesh that out a little bit more for me? I'm a little confused.
Basically, he's just signed a law that says if you are receiving food stamps, you are obligated to work for them, some form of community service, and to basically compensate the state for the money that you're getting in your food stamp program. I've heard suggestions for the same be applied to any form of welfare. And as I said, it's probably going to thin out the welfare food stamp rolls of those people who are on food stamps and welfare just because they don't want to work. But at the same time, we have to be careful that people who are on food stamps who are unable to work do not get unfairly penalized.
Sure, I totally understand. And I'm wondering, is this going to be selective, or how selective of employers this would be? Because I'm wondering, you're going to work somewhere, are you going to get a wage, or are they just paying you flat out in food stamps. That's what
I think it's I think it's community service in exchange for the food stamps because, again, there are people who are working for wages and salaries who still do need the food stamps. So I think it's more of a community service thing. Anyway, Kevin, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back with more news and phone calls after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Let's go back to the phones here. Jeff in Minnesota. Aloha, Jeff. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Long time since I talked to you, but I really like how you're, you go right to that link and you go right to the YouTube and you get it right on your show. So it's pretty cool. There's a bunch of times that I couldn't get through or couldn't get to your show, but I want to talk about the concept of, there's a lot of this stuff called shadow blocking or
shadow banning.
Shadow banning. Okay, so there's a concept in the taxi business that back in the days when they were on the radio, if a guy didn't have his financial affairs with the business office, no matter where he called in from, his box was blocked. And this is the whole thing about the world now. You can't get out. Your box is blocked.
Yeah,
and
that's
all these algorithms in charge.
Yeah, it really is a deplorable state of affairs, and it's kind of interesting where you have the liberals who are out there defending the censorship of Google and Facebook and Twitter, saying, well, they're private companies, they're allowed to do business with whoever they want and not with who they don't want, and yet these are the same liberals who went after that baker who didn't want to bake a wedding cake for a lesbian couple. And it's another example where the liberals don't really have a philosophy of any kind. It is simply, this is what I want, when I want it, and that should be a force of nature.
Yeah, so, well, anyway, it's been a long time. I haven't called in for a while, but your show's coming in pretty good, when you hit the link from the webpage and it goes over to YouTube and fires right up, and then if I can't catch it, or I go back and listen to the archives. So it's working.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, YouTube did fix the streaming page today. I don't know what happened yesterday, but it is running normally today. All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call, and we're going to switch over to Chris in Nevada. Aloha, Chris. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike. I think that Trump should go ahead and side with the Mexicans' view on the immigration issue.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I think he should agree with them so much that he should just make our laws identical to theirs.
I've been saying that for a long time, to all these people who say open borders, everybody has a right to go. It's not fair to the Mexicans. And I'm saying, all right, let's be fair. Let's have an exact mirror of Mexico's immigration laws. Because if you go down to the border with Mexico and you walk across that border without permission, you don't get free stuff. You don't get transportation to some place where they need your vote. You don't get to vote. You don't get a job. You get arrested. You get put in jail.
Right. Honestly, from the mid 80s on, all the immigrants, people coming in, the illegals, they knew that the government was not going to enforce. They knew it. They started going back and forth. They started some long term. If they do something bad, they go back home for about a year or two and then come back. I mean, they've used this country. They laugh at the citizens, us, like we're soft and we're pathetic. And the whole world laughing at our immigration laws. Now all of a sudden, somebody, now they're trying to push back because, they say, hey, wait a minute, this is not supposed to be happening. These people are supposed to be just bending over backwards for us. And now all of a sudden, we have to actually make an effort. Anyway, that's the thing about that. But Mike, I really have an issue with it. Something that you said yesterday with the teachers. Okay, I have a problem with the military, the law enforcement, but especially the teachers, because these are the foot soldiers that have brought us to this point. Even though maybe the military's the guys going in not knowing that they're going to be fighting for something that they didn't think that, they thought they were fighting to defend us. But after the first time tour of duty, they should know. And after that, it's all about maybe it's just an adrenaline rush or something. And then the police, but the teachers to me are the worst because they're the ones that have been following this agenda by the people over them. That, you know what, we're going to bring this country down. We're going to use you to indoctrinate the young people.
Well, I need to play devil's advocate here, and this is because I've been a teacher myself. It isn't the teachers themselves. They are constrained by the school administration and school policy. And I learned that the hard way when I was teaching remedial math at a high school in Southern California many years ago, long before I met the lady Claire. And I did it for just 1 year. And after that, I said, this is definitely not what I want to be having to deal with for the rest of my life. Right. And what it was is, during the course of the school year, I collected around me some young students who were very enthusiastic about learning math. And so during lunch break, we would all sit in my classroom and I'd start to teach them about slide rules, which tells you just how long ago I'm talking about here. And I got hauled on the carpet because apparently the parents of one of the remedial kids, who was remedial because they weren't interested in math, was demanding that I teach her kid slide rule. And I was saying, sure, if he's interested in learning, but he doesn't know the basics. And so I was told, no, I couldn't teach anything outside the curriculum because the political necessity was you give all the kids an equal education, meaning that the smart kids were being dragged down to the level of the dumb kids, and I really couldn't go along with that. I'm sure that a lot of people go into teaching with very good, noble motives. Same thing for police, same thing for medicine, but the system eventually does corrupt them, or they leave, which is what happened in my case.
Right, or they leave. But if you're there for 20 years, most of these teachers are progressive at heart, and in their minds, they're molding our children into the kind of citizen they think they should be. And it's not, and if you're there long term, you want to do that. So in their mind, they don't know the big picture. They're just pushing whatever little motivation they have. But the big picture is that they are corrupting our generation. And it's interesting that you had that article about that with that Hungarian, politician that was talking about how the world government was molding the people into being that way. It's interesting because the Eastern Bloc countries got in late to the UN NATO thing. So they didn't get the full indoctrination of a generation that the other countries got. So that's why they still have some sense, I think.
Well, that's a good observation. That's a good observation. But again, I want to step back, and in defense of the teachers, some teachers are progressive. I certainly wasn't when I was teaching, either in California or at UH. But I kept my politics out of the classroom. That's not what I'm being paid to do. But the progressive liberal stance of America's public education was hard-coded into the system through Common Core. And teachers who refused to go along with that were very much penalized, regardless of what their personal political convictions were. So it's not really fair to say that the teachers were being progressive. It's much more accurate to say these are teachers who are working for a progressive system.
Either way, they're still the foot soldiers that are getting it done for the elite. Mike,
well, the way we counter that is we have to arrange for a world where parents are able to spend more time with their children and say, this is what's really going on. I mean, the fact that we have conservative students out of Parkland who are out there talking about support for the Second Amendment tells us that those teachers really aren't as effective as they imagine they might be in selling the liberal agenda. Anyway, Chris, I need to let you go. Got other callers waiting on the line and more news to get through for the end of the show. So let's switch over to Chuck in Texas. Chuck, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, sorry I had to drop earlier. I'm doing one of those jobs that white guys won't do. I'm laying concrete in my backyard.
Okay.
Anyway, wanted to point something out here. When we talk about the census and Trump coming out with this new question on the census, I remember writing extra questions on the census.
Yes.
Remember last census? We were real upset. Let us not allow than to come up with a Trojan horse. We must remember what we stood for before and not let them move the Overton window to where we suddenly are accepting it. And there's two other items, and darned if I can remember what they are.
Well, Chuck, before you move forward, go back to your Constitution, which is what authorizes the census. And it says the purpose of the census is to draw the district boundaries for the House of Representatives. Now, those boundaries are supposed to be around legal American voters, not illegals. And so in order for the census to carry out its constitutional duty, the citizenship of the people being surveyed has to be known. That's just common sense. I agree that some of the other questions that were being asked were very inappropriate invasions of privacy. It was all for various and sundry research purposes, total information awareness. But if you understand the purpose of the census itself in the Constitution, the citizenship of the person that is responding to the census has to be determined. Because if they're a citizen, they count toward the drawing of the district boundaries. If they're not a citizen, they don't count.
Call me embarrassed. I just got my butt handed to me.
I didn't mean to be rough about it. I'm sorry. I'll send you a MyPillow or something.
Okay. Great point. Great show as always, buddy. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. All right, a little bit of news from outer space. The SpaceX cargo capsule arrives at the space station with tons of supplies, 3 tons of supplies and science gear. And apparently they've got reusable spacecraft. The same capsule previously visited the ISS in April of 2016. And this is the second mission for the Dragon booster. And apparently SpaceX has now reached their goal of being able to cycle a launch 1 every 2 months. So, boy, they are doing some really amazing work. I saw a show the other night, I think it was on Smithsonian, America's Space Billionaires. And even though we may not agree with how some of them got to be billionaires, I have to admire their commitment and their vision to saying, let's go back out into space. And they're now starting to do the job that NASA should be doing, but as long as it's getting done. All right, another phone call. Tony in Texas. Aloha, Tony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you. I was looking at the UK Daily Mail, and this Nassim, the YouTube shooter, they're suggesting that he is a transgender. And they've got photos. I mean, he's got the Adam's apple, big hands.
Oh, well.
So, wanted to let you know.
It almost seems irrelevant at this point. The question I want to know, the question to me is far more important than whether Nassim was transgender, is whether she was on prescription antidepressants. Because I understand how angering and frustrating it is to have a YouTube channel canceled. Mike Adams had his channel canceled. Richie Allen had his channel canceled. You're not seeing them driving on up to YouTube with a gun in hand. This was clearly an inappropriate, over-the-top reaction, the sort of reaction we see with somebody who's either on or withdrawing from SSRIs. And again, the family tried to warn the police, and the police, even though they found her in her car, sleeping near YouTube, they didn't do anything. They didn't intervene. It was a complete failure of the system.
Can I ask you this? When police officers find a person such as this in their car for, I don't know, a day or two, sleeping, isn't it the proper protocol to search the vehicle to make sure that they're safe?
Well, in this case, it wasn't over a period of a few days. It was just the one time. And I don't know what the protocol is. I had it happen to me once. Many years ago, I went up to Oregon to buy a car and then drive it back down to Los Angeles. And along the way, because I didn't have money for a motel, I pulled off onto a little side dirt road to get some sleep because I didn't think I was driving safely. And I got, woken up by the cops, and they said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm driving from Oregon to Los Angeles, and I got tired. I didn't think I was driving safely, and so I'm getting some sleep." And they said, "Okay, that's fine." And that was the end of it.
Okay. I get it. Okay. Well, thank you for your time. Great show.
All right.
And we'll talk.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. All right. So now we're at the time in the show where we talk about human-caused global warming. Insert ominous music here. Actually, it should be a drum roll. Snow canceled the Yankees home opener. And this is supposed to be spring where we are. And, of course, nothing says spring like baseball opening day. Apparently in southern Connecticut, they had a lot of traffic snarls from snow there. Right now, experts are saying that the North Atlantic icebergs are expected to last until late June. Icebergs in the shipping lanes. The Arctic is still at minus 30 degrees centigrade. Remember, they were saying that global warming is why the Arctic was warming and sending its cold air down here, and that's why we're having the hard winter. Wrong again. Nearly a third of Canadians do not believe that humans and industry mostly cause climate change. So the brainwashing is beginning to fade away. Climate is dominated by that glowing ball of fusing hydrogen up in the sky, which varies in energy output, and right now it's a little bit in decline, and the changing shape and orientation of Earth's orbit. That's it. The impacts of industry and humans are microscopic in comparison. But Al Gore couldn't get you to pay a sun tax or a cloud tax or an Earth orbit tax. So they demonized carbon dioxide, blamed it on humans, and decided to make a fortune off of it. And Al Gore did quite well. He ended that 2000 campaign in Florida nearly broke. And while he didn't become Earth's first carbon billionaire, he is quite wealthy now. And he bought himself a very lovely house on the beach in Southern California. So much for the rising ocean problem. Now, as you know, people are still very concerned over GMO and gene splicing. And the GMO companies are trying to get around that now by employing the CRISPR technology, where they're going on in and instead of just splicing genes together from multiple life forms, they're just editing the DNA. And they're trying to present it as being no different than the DNA you would get from natural hybridization techniques. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program today. Now, following the U.S. Invasion of Afghanistan, the poppies were blooming, and very inexpensive heroin started flowing out of Afghanistan and into the United States of America. And not too surprisingly, all these years later, everybody's talking about this opioid crisis. And we're talking about legal opioids, not the stuff that you're buying off the street corner, which is another problem in and of itself. Recent Harvard University analysis found that doctors who prescribe opioids are being paid huge sums of money from the manufacturers. And the research discovered that, that in 2014 and 2015, thousands of doctors were paid over $25,000 each from opioid manufacturers. And the more they prescribed, the more they would get paid. And for the doctors who were just writing opioids for everything, they were just raking in the money like crazy. And so while we may be talking about the opioid crisis, it was the pharmaceutical industry with a complicit government that fueled that crisis. Now, there's another story, this is out of The Guardian, showing that in states where medical marijuana is legal, opioid prescriptions are lower because people will self-medicate with cannabis and then they won't go to the doctor and say, I need something for the pain. And that may be the reason that Jeff Sessions is trying to basically recriminalize marijuana. It's stealing profits away from the pharmaceutical industries. And right now the pharmaceutical industries are on the warpath against kratom, which is another natural product that can be used to alleviate pain. And they want that to go away. They don't want you to have any choice but to buy what they are selling you. Now, you've seen these little DNA testing kits, 23andMe and Ancestry.com. Little bit of a whoopsie here. Lady named Kelly Rowlett sent in her DNA to Ancestry.com's DNA test, and when she read the report, she assumed there was some kind of a mistake because it showed that her father was not really her father. And she was not adopted. And so she talked to her parents and said what was going on. And it turned out that 36 years ago, her parents were having trouble conceiving, and they went to see a fertility expert, MD, who, as it turns out, fertilized the mother with his own sperm instead of the husband. And this is not the first time we've heard of this happening. But what a terrible way to find out. A little bit of a whoopsie there. And apparently there's going to be a lawsuit as a result there. It's amazing here. A lot of people still talking about microplastics. It's now estimated that we swallow 114 microplastics with every meal. These are little nano-sized bits of plastic that are just gotten into the food through the packaging machine, processing machine. Nobody knows what harm it has, if it leaves the body, or if there's a long-term exposure problem. So we got to be really, really careful about that kind of stuff. All right, we're coming up here on the end of the show, and thank you for holding back on the phone calls because I really needed to sort of clear off the talking points. We'll start fresh again tomorrow. So again, if you can donate to RBN or if you can donate to whatreallyhappened.com, we really do need it. We're running right on the edge here. Nobody's getting rich in this business. We're doing it because we respect the Republic. We want to restore the Republic. We respect you, the American people. We think you're capable of thinking for yourself and deciding for yourself what is best for this country and the American people. And we need to reclaim our rights as American citizens. So there's the music. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of stuff to share with you, and we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.